G'day guys, it's Adam Kogan here in the SSW TV studios. We are running a track here for NDC and it's been a lot of fun. One of the speakers here is Liam Elliott. How are you, Liam?
Good, thanks Adam. How you doing?
Awesome. We are going to be talking about eating elephants.
We are.
What a strange title.
No, I didn't eat any elephants. It's about a saying from a World War II veteran. When eating an elephant, take one bite at a time.
Right.
So basically just saying if you've got a really big problem in front of you, just focus on the smallest piece right in front of you.
Right, and this has brought you on a journey about domains and DDD, is that right?
That's one aspect. So in the talk, I like to start with why. So I really like to focus on getting back to the first principles and understanding why we're building the project. Then when we get past the why, then we start to look at how we're going to build the product. And when I like to focus on the how, yes, I do like to look at DDD to actually as my mechanism for identifying my how.
Right, so I break the rule. I went straight to the
Correct.
how.
Correct. So we always start with why.
Thank you. All right. Well, why did you get enamored with this topic?
Because just through my own experience, I've been on many different projects, and very recently I was just getting frustrated with the way things were done, and it was really making it tough for me, and I was trying to figure out why things were not working properly. And when I started to dig into it, I went back to my own past and books that I've been reading and realised that first of all we do need to start with why. Really identify why it is that we're building the product and just getting back to those first principles. And then if we go to Simon Sinek's golden circle, naturally the follow-on from why is how. And when it comes to enterprise products or enterprise development, if I'm looking at the how, I really like to fall back on DDD. So from my point of view, I find the DDD process being more than just what people assume being the implementation side, identifying your entities and those technical details, but really getting it down to the why part of the DDD, which is identifying your problem space. So really focusing on the core domain that we're working on and really understanding what DDD means from the very first principles side of things.
Okay, so if we start with the why, that why comes from the product owner in a software project?
More than likely, yes. It could be the business, it could be the customer, but yes, the product owner is usually.
And the how, does that come from the developers?
The architect.
The architect.
More often than
right.
not, I'll find that the solution architect is the one that's coming up with that how.
In collaboration.
In collaboration. They will be obviously working with the product owner, they'll be working with the developers, they'll be working with the tester, everyone on the team. Right. But ultimately I do find that the architects are the ones that are
right. And then it's the hows, the real work is done by the developers.
That's the what.
The what?
That's the what.
The what, yes. Okay, so what is a domain model? Because this is pretty core, isn't it?
It is. It's very core to domain-driven design. Domain-driven design. So we're putting that domain model right in the center of our software. And Eric Evans in the book likes to say we put it at the heart of the software. It's the heart of everything. And really, it's the model that we have of the domain that we're actually trying to build. So if we go through domain-driven design processes, the domain model could be the software that we produce, so it could be that project that we've got in our solution called domain that has all the entities and everything in it. It could be a UML diagram that describes how all of our classes move together. But ultimately it is that model, our understanding, our model of the domain experts world.
What do you do, what do you do to get I think you refer to it as a ubiquitous language?
Yep.
Is that essentially a consistent language?
It's not necessarily a consistent language. Yes, it's consistent, should be consistently used across the project, but if we think about the term ubiquitous, it's just there in the background. It's kind of like the air we breathe. It should be just one of those languages that's used across the entire project. And we like to say that everyone on the team, the product owner, the developers, the domain experts, the testers, the customers, everyone on the team should be using this same language. They should all be talking the same language.
And this is a non-stressful thing?
So there's always
until someone uses the wrong term.
It is, but it's the idea is to make sure that we remove any ambiguity. And so in the talk, I talk about ambiguous or overloaded terms. There's many that come to mind if we think about a table.
Yes.
Table being, in the world of a database, in the context of a database or a bounded context of a DBA, a table is somewhere where we store data.
Right.
But in the bounded context of a furniture store, a table is something that has 4 legs and is made of timber or metal or whatever else. So it really depends on that context that we're in that helps define the language we're using to help remove those ambiguities.
Right, okay. That brings up a funny story I heard by one of the guys here who had a girlfriend at university, and they were all sitting around, and the girlfriend was worried that she wasn't keeping up with all the software engineering project. And they're all sitting around, and she says, look, I'm going to fail. And I go, no, you'll be fine. And then someone says, I'm going to study. Oh, it's good. Tables aren't in the exam. And she goes, there's no tables in the exam? Where are we going to write the paper? Then you realise she was screwed. But anyway.
Well, yeah, I guess that's it. So if you're in the right bounded context and you understand the dictionary or the language used within that context, then we can start to remove all those confusions.
Right. So let's take a real example. We have, in our company, we have dynamics, and it has entities, right? Or it has an entity that is an account. And then you've got the Time Pro system, which has clients, and then you have the Zero accounting system, which has customers. How do we get agreement on this? What's the system?
Sure. So, and I assume too, your Zero system's going to have accounts in them.
That's right. Yes. It gets worse.
So then we start to see these overloaded terms. And so from a domain modeling point of view,
yes,
we're going to look at each product or each domain that each one lives in. So we have the accounting domain.
Yeah.
We're going to have your CRM domain. You're going to have your timesheet domain.
Yes.
3 different domains. We can wrap them up in their own bounded context. So that bounded context is a boundary within which the model that we build lives inside this bounded context. It's the boundary for that model. So that the terms that we mention in that ubiquitous dictionary for that one context live within that context. So if I have an account in my Dynamics bounded context, it could mean something different to the concept of an account within your banking context. So as a software implementer or as someone that's actually building the software, I don't need to think about what do you mean by account. I just need to make sure that I'm in the right context. If I'm talking to your accountants, I know that that's the context that we're in. So when we talk about an account, I know that term.
Oh, so you got to keep switching.
As someone that's covering all the bounded context or someone at the higher level for a project, yeah, you're context switching all the time. You're moving between the various different contexts. But an individual developer may only focus on one context.
Right.
And in their world, there's only one version of account. And they don't need to worry about anyone else's.
Okay.
But it still should be written down in your ubiquitous dictionary.
Oh, where's the ubiquitous dictionary get stored?
Wherever your documentation is. So you could stick it in the wiki if there's a wiki associated with it. I like to stick it in the code, in the source base, in the source there, up next to your readmes, in your actual project documentation. So
stick it in a markdown
stick
file.
Stick it in a markdown file
sort.
there. Then anyone can add it, anyone can edit it, anyone can read it, and it's always there. When someone new comes onto the project, they can read that, they can understand everything, and they can get up to speed with the language of that bounded context.
So, does it help at all just to tell people to describe things in namespace style, like to say dynamics.accounts, 0.customers? Does that help?
Not really. Well, almost. You may find, and it really depends on your project that you're working on. If I'm working on a large application, maybe a monolith application, and I've got everything broken down into namespaces, then yes, you might find that this dictionary lives within each bounded context inside the greater monolith, and that might be broken up by namespace. But otherwise, if they're completely separate projects, then it doesn't really matter, because it's really the person that's doing the work, that's talking about that context. It's their responsibility to know what language they're talking at that point in time. Okay.
One of the fascinating things I thought about the way you think through this is the documentation and the amount. And the how has more documentation than the what.
Yep.
The what basically should have no documentation. So when you're talking about the how from the product owner and what, not the how and what the documentation is, are you thinking architecture diagrams? Are you thinking, like when you say a lot of documentation that side, what are you visualizing?
Sure. So again, when it comes to documentation, I like to use that why, how, what framework. And I like to see a lot of documentation around the why. Why are we building it? Why are you putting in certain workarounds? Why have you got a hack in the system? Right? If I've got a code, if I've got a hack in my system and I put a code comment in there, I want that comment to tell me why it's there. I don't really care about what it's doing. I just want to know why it's there, because future me or someone else comes along and they go to remove it. If I only document what's there, they're just going to remove it and not understand why it actually was there to start with. Okay? So the idea is if we put down the why, then they can actually look at it. And if that why changes, if that why gets removed down the track, then they know that they can safely remove that hack. So I love seeing more documentation around the why, because we find that that's very static. It doesn't change too frequently. Then we step down to the how. And the how will change more often than we find the why, but still it won't change too much. So architectural diagrams are a great place for your how documentation, because that's where we're going to describe how things work, how things are put together, not justifying the implementation of the why, so to speak. And then, like I said earlier, the what, I don't really see any value in that. Like, if there's an algorithm on screen and you put code comments there telling me that it's line 1 is 1 + 1 and line 2 is 4 + 5, the code should document that itself. But why it's doing it is more important than what it's actually doing.
Got it. Okay. So when you're talking DDD, you have this problem space and solution space.
Yep.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I personally find that DDD, a lot of people will focus on the technical aspect of DDD. So your implementation side. Again, this is the what aspect. So what entities do we have and what are we building up? The entities, the aggregate roots, your repository patterns, the services, and all those kind of things. And that is known as, that's the solution space. That's how are we solving the problem. So that's what tools are we putting in place to solve that problem. And that's the technical side. Then we've also got the problem space. So let's define that problem that we're trying to solve. And I personally feel that doesn't get as much love in the world of DDD as the technical side. But I really think it is actually more important and more valuable, again, focusing on the why, to actually solve the problem of that problem space, identifying that problem space clearly and solving that. Because in a large project, in a large multidisciplinary project, if you don't understand your problem space, if you don't understand the lay of the land, you're going to get into a whole world of hurt when you just jump straight into that implementation detail.
Right, okay. There's another thing I'd love you to explain as well, and that is Eric Evans says, relating to bounded context, which I think is an important thing, the delimited applicability of a particular model.
Yes.
Could you explain that bit to me?
It's a bit of a mouthful, the delimited applicability of a particular model. Yeah. I like to think of that as just being the boundary within which a model exists.
Yes.
Okay, so if we go back to your example earlier of the Dynamic CRM Time Pro and Xero.
Yes.
If I have a model modeling your bank accounts, it's applicable within your banking bounded context. It doesn't apply at all to your CRM application. It doesn't apply to your Time Pro application. There may be some concepts that do cross those boundaries, but they'll appear inside the other bounded context too. But basically it's just saying that it is the boundary within which that model lives.
Okay. And what do you do when there is the duplication? Is it important for you to, if something exists and you have the power, even though it's a lot of work, to rename things so there's not a conflict?
No, we won't rename things, because what we're doing by renaming things is we're adding confusion to our ubiquitous language. Okay?
Really?
So
I thought you were removing confusion.
No, well, we're not really, because if I've got my ubiquitous language inside my banking software, and in that world, any accountant and everyone that works in that world understands what an account is. And for them, it is where you store your money at the bank. Now, if we go into the CRM world, now I'm talking to your CRM experts and the people that live in that world. They're familiar with their own version of account. Now, I can't walk up to them and say, you're no longer using the word account, you now need to use customer instead.
And they'll say, why?
They're gonna look at me and say, well, why?
Yeah.
Now you're confusing it. Now your model doesn't make sense to me.
I had that conversation, and you know what they said? It's not called an account that you're referring to, that's called a bank account.
Correct. So, and in that respect, that's where the bounded contexts and the ubiquitous language really comes in handy. Because I know if I'm in the domain, if I'm in the CRM domain in that bounded context, if you talk about an account, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I can talk to anyone on your CRM team and they know we're all talking the same language. And in their world, they have a bank account. They might refer to bank accounts, which just happens to refer to the same thing that in the banking domain is an account. So we've got two separate languages, two separate dictionaries we're working against that keeps the models internally consistent. And everyone on the teams inside that model understand what's going on. Now, one of the examples that is quite often used, and I think the accounts is a good one, is in the world of a bank account, or in the world of a banking domain, an account might mean one thing. It might have a person or a company, a number, it might have a balance and all other details associated with an account. Whereas in the world of the CRM application, all they're concerned about the bank account, maybe just the bank account number. They don't care about the balance, they don't care about any of the other details. All they care about is just the number. So in their world, sure, it's the same thing. We're talking about the exact same entity. The bank account is the same thing, but we're just looking at it from a different angle. And so in the world of the CRM, we're only ever concerned about one little property on that object.
Right. So what was the moment, like we're just talking about conversation and language here. What was the moment that made you think, this is a super fascinating topic, like this DDD and bounded context and all this stuff?
It's interesting because when I was first introduced to DDD many years ago, I came across the term ubiquitous language. I thought, wow, that's just another term within that paradigm, and moved on. And then very recently, I started a new job, and quite a large domain. There's a lot of conflicting terms. There's a lot of bounded contexts, a lot of cross-cutting domains, and we've got various different domain experts, but there was no common language. There was no way that the developers or myself, the architect, or anyone on that project, funnily enough, some of the domain experts are actually architects, building architects, and I'm a software architect.
Proper.
So there's an example of, okay, well, how do we clarify when we're talking about architect? Who are you talking about? And not having that, and having that confusion in the room really just made me sort of sit back and realise there has to be a simpler way.
Right.
And then the cogs started turning over and I realised I actually knew the answer.
Right. And so things have cleared up a bit. Have you got a wiki and you're referring people to it and you're trying to...
Yeah, so we've got the wiki, but I also really am pushing to have it as close to the source, as close to the actual domain model that we're building is where our ubiquitous language is. And the modelling process that we've done recently with the domain experts, we can sit down, and the example I gave in the talk was a very arbitrary example of the brake system in the car, but it highlights that process where I'm asking questions that I think I know the answer to, but I'm still asking them. I'm just trying to get those ideas out of the domain experts' head. So I'm trying to solve two problems here. I'm writing down those documents, I'm getting down that dictionary so that we're using the same terms, and I don't want to walk in and start talking about something and realise that we're talking a different language, right? There's assumptions sometimes that I might start talking about something. I think I know enough, but really I'm actually talking about something that means nothing to them.
Yeah.
But what it's also doing is it's getting them to think about the way that they think and what they're doing, right? Domain experts who have been doing this for many years on their own, they've picked up habits and experience that they forget.
Right.
It's like you're not thinking about breathing, you don't think about tying your shoes. But if I ask you questions about what process do you use to tie up your shoelaces, or which foot do you do first, you have to start thinking about it. And then you're going to start having that conversation with me, and we might start getting further ideas and further requirements out that you personally did not realize that you actually knew.
Fascinating. I hear you. In fact, I just did a video about the importance of asking questions and reconfirming that information. Some people find it kind of annoying to be asked something that you already know the answer to, or you think you do, and you're just confirming things. But I might finish off by a curly one. With respect to bounded contexts, how do you know when it's too big and you need to break it apart?
That's interesting. And I think to me the key there lies within your ubiquitous language. Okay? If I've got terms in there that are confusing, if I've got conflicting terms, and if I'm having conversations and I don't know what's going on, I think there's a good idea that perhaps the scope that we're looking at, the bounded context that we're actually in right now, might be too big. So we might need to break it apart and start looking for little subdomains and ways that we can break it down and start to move these terms into their own domain. And one of the great experiences that I've had recently in that world is I might start working on a domain model and talking to the domain expert, trying to figure out things. You start putting pieces in, and when you're building things, you're like, it doesn't feel right. Something's not right. It's just it feels like I'm just throwing this here, and they're just not gluing together. And then you build it back and forward, and you're just doing a few little tweaks here and there. And you just change one little bit. You rotate it by, like a puzzle piece, you rotate it by 32 degrees, 32 and a half degrees, and it just slots in. And then everything just falls into place. It's just that exact same feeling as the puzzle piece. You just get that.
That's right.
It now just makes sense. And I think you find that same thing with breaking apart your bounded context.
Right, okay. Oh, it's always awesome speaking to you. Wouldn't it be awesome if the whole world just spoke English and had the exact same terminology for every single thing, and everybody used the same computer system?
That might be taken a bit far, but within your own context, the right language, and that way there should be no more confusions.
Well, I've loved the chat, Liam. It's always awesome chatting to you. And now we're going to get back on the live stream and watch some more NDC. And this is Adam Kogan signing off for SSW TV.